Many talented people of colour were snubbed in major categories. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that. The Hollywood foreign press are all very, very racist.
This script sticks to what has actually been reported and confirmed by named outlets, court filings, and on-the-record statements. Where something is disputed, unverified, or still in litigation, the script says so, rather than presenting it as settled fact. It does not claim these three stories are secretly connected. They are presented as three separate, real chapters in recent entertainment history. In January of 2020, Ricky Gervais walked onto the stage at the Golden Globes for the fifth time as host, and told the room he didn't care anymore. What followed was one of the most talked-about award show monologues in recent memory, and 5 years later, two other stories, involving two other women, would remind people just how much can happen behind the smiling surface of the entertainment industry. This isn't a theory about a hidden connection between them. It's three separate accounts of what happens when the industry's public image collides with what actually goes on inside it. Gervais had hosted the Golden Globes 4 times before that night, each time pushing a little further into material that made the room squirm. By his fifth outing, he'd apparently decided that softening the edges wasn't worth it anymore. He opened by telling the audience flatly that he didn't care if he never got invited back. He spent the next several minutes going after easy, well-covered targets: Felicity Huffman's role in the college admissions scandal, the streaming wars, the hypocrisy of studios lecturing the public on social issues while chasing profit above all else. Those jokes landed the way award show jokes usually do, a little uncomfortable, mostly funny, the kind of thing that gets clipped and shared the next morning. Then he brought up Jeffrey Epstein. He told the room, on camera, in front of a global television audience, that plenty of people in that room had flown on Epstein's plane, and that they knew exactly who else had been on it. The joke did not land the way the others had. Cameras caught visibly uncomfortable reactions across the room, including from Tom Hanks, whose expression became a widely circulated image afterward. It was the kind of silence that gets more attention than a laugh would have. At the time, Epstein had been dead for about 5 months, having died in a Manhattan jail cell in August 2019 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. His death was officially ruled a suicide, though his family's independently hired pathologist publicly disputed that finding, and questions about his network of associates were already circulating in tabloids and legal filings, if not yet in a fully released documentary trove. Gervais' joke wasn't built on inside information so much as it was reading the room correctly. Epstein's ties to wealthy and famous people had been reported on for years by that point, even before any comprehensive document release. Gervais was not invited back to host the Golden Globes after that night, a fact he has confirmed himself, without apparent regret, in multiple interviews since. He has described his approach to that kind of material using the framework of the British court jester, someone whose job is to say the thing everyone privately knows but no one with something to lose is willing to say out loud, precisely because the jester doesn't have anything a king can take from him. It's a tidy explanation for why he could say what he said and walk away relatively unscathed. His career, unlike almost everyone in that room, doesn't depend on Hollywood's goodwill. In 2025, the U.S. Department of Justice released a large volume of documents related to the Epstein investigation, flight logs, financial records, and communications connecting Epstein to a range of figures across entertainment, finance, and politics. Those documents renewed public and media scrutiny of several individuals whose names appeared in them, and some public figures named in the material stepped back from public roles or made career changes in the months that followed, generally without offering detailed public explanations tied specifically to the releases. Gervais, watching from outside the industry he'd addressed 5 years earlier, noted in a later interview that his old monologue read, in hindsight, like a rough outline of what the documents eventually confirmed, and he said this without triumph, more with the flat tone of someone who'd have preferred to be wrong. If Gervais represents someone saying the uncomfortable thing from a position of relative safety, Wendy Williams represents almost the opposite, someone who built an entire career saying the uncomfortable thing from inside the industry she was criticizing, with far less insulation from the consequences. Williams started in New York radio in the 1990s, at a time when several major names in the music industry were treated as effectively untouchable by most of the press, not because they were above criticism but because criticizing them carried real professional risk. Williams named names anyway. In 1998, while at Hot 97 in New York, on-air comments she made about prominent figures in the music industry contributed to her departure from the station, something she confirmed years later, in a 2006 conversation with Howard Stern, saying plainly that what she'd said about powerful people had cost her that job. The station never gave a formal account tying the comments directly to her exit, but the pattern was clear enough to her. Say certain names, lose the platform. She lost that platform and rebuilt her career more than once. By the time The Wendy Williams Show launched in 2008, she'd already spent a decade proving she couldn't be easily managed into silence. She has spoken publicly about being pressured and, on at least one occasion on her own show, about an interaction with a guest she'd previously criticized that referenced her son in a way she later described as feeling like a warning. She kept going. Over 14 seasons, she built a reputation as one of the few daytime hosts willing to say plainly, on air, that she believed Ellen DeGeneres had a side to her that didn't match the public image. A claim that, at the time she made it, wasn't broadly echoed elsewhere in mainstream daytime television. For 19 years, Ellen DeGeneres closed every episode of her show with the same phrase, "Be kind to one another." It became the entire foundation of a brand worth hundreds of millions of dollars, on merchandise, in interviews, in the general public perception of what her show represented. In July 2020, BuzzFeed News published a detailed investigation built on accounts from dozens of former staff members across different departments and years of the show's run. The accounts described a workplace culture that reportedly stood in sharp contrast to the show's public image, allegations of a cold, sometimes hostile environment, staff reportedly told not to make eye contact with DeGeneres, and a broader culture that former employees said didn't match the Be Kind branding. Warner Media opened an internal investigation following the reporting, and 3 top producers on the show were removed from their positions. DeGeneres addressed the situation on air at the start of her next season, acknowledging that things had happened on the show that shouldn't have. The show ended in 2022, with its final episodes drawing warm send-offs from a long list of celebrity guests. Wendy Williams was notably absent from those tributes. DeGeneres has since relocated to the United Kingdom and has said in interviews that she has no near-term plans to return to the U.S., describing herself as feeling she'd become a target for criticism that exceeded what she considered fair. Former staff members who spoke to BuzzFeed and other outlets in 2020 offered a different account of proportionality. While DeGeneres' story became a public reckoning covered extensively in the press, Wendy Williams' situation has played out largely through court filings, with Williams herself mostly unable to speak publicly and freely about it. In May 2022, the same year her show ended, Wells Fargo contacted a New York court with concerns about Williams' ability to manage her financial affairs. A court-appointed guardian, Sabrina Morrissey, was given authority over Williams' finances and daily affairs. Williams' ex-husband, Kevin Hunter, later filed legal documents alleging the guardianship arrangement had been established through a closed proceeding that left Williams without adequate legal representation at the time. In 2023, Williams was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia and aphasia. In November 2024, her guardian filed court documents declaring her permanently incapacitated. In January 2025, Williams called into the Breakfast Club radio show and said directly that she did not believe she was cognitively impaired, describing her situation as feeling like captivity, with limited access to people she wanted to speak with. She also told Good Day New York that she had passed independent competency evaluations. A neurologist unconnected to her existing medical team reportedly reviewed her case and concluded she did not have frontotemporal dementia, directly at odds with the diagnosis used to support the guardianship. Her legal team has used that evaluation as part of an ongoing appeal. In March 2025, NYPD officers went to her assisted living facility and transported her to a hospital. Williams said publicly she'd received no warning beforehand. Supporters have held protests in Los Angeles and New York calling for the guardianship to end. Kevin Hunter has filed a $250 million lawsuit against those overseeing the arrangement, alleging it has become something used against Williams rather than something protecting her. Though Williams herself has told TMZ she did not ask him to file that suit and does not want him involved in her personal affairs. A Lifetime documentary about her situation drew enough attention that her guardian's legal team responded to it in court filings, characterizing it as a distorted account, while Williams' family has described it as the most accurate public portrayal of her circumstances to date. The guardianship remains in place, and the competing medical evaluations remain unresolved in court as of this writing. None of this means these 3 stories are secretly one story. They aren't. but they do sit side by side as three different illustrations of what it costs to be the person saying the uncomfortable thing inside an industry built on carefully managed images, and how much that cost depends on how much leverage you have walking in. Gervais said his piece from a position of real independence. His career and income were never dependent on Hollywood's goodwill in the way a studio actor's or a daytime host's would be, so losing the Golden Globes hosting gig cost him relatively little. Williams had no such insulation. Her income, her platform, and her daily life were all tied to the same industry ecosystem she'd spent decades criticizing on air, and the cost she's paid has been dramatically higher, a guardianship dispute that has left her, by her own account, without the freedom to speak on her own terms during the very period when some of what she said years ago has drawn renewed attention. DeGeneres' situation is different again. Rather than naming uncomfortable truths about others, her show's internal culture became the uncomfortable truth once former staff went public. And rather than fight the fallout from inside the industry, she left the country. What's changed in the last several years isn't any single revelation. It's how much closer the public record has moved toward things that were previously discussed mostly as rumor, gossip, or comedy material. Flight logs and financial records aren't the same as a punchline. Sworn court filings aren't the same as a tabloid headline. And on-air commentary from years earlier doesn't retroactively become proof of anything. But it can look, in hindsight, like someone was simply willing to say something before anyone else was. Gervais is not hosting the Golden Globes again anytime soon. Wendy Williams is still fighting her guardianship in court, with no resolution yet. Ellen DeGeneres is still living in the United Kingdom. Three very different people, three very different outcomes, and one open question worth sitting with. What does it actually cost, in this industry, to say the thing everyone already knows? If you found this rundown useful, let us know what you think in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into stories the entertainment industry would